My parents said my pain was drama when I collapsed from my illness. They called me lazy, a burden, a waste. I spent 2 years in silence, begging for their love. Now, I have something they desperately want. And for the first time, I said no. Their faces went pale. They're not ready for what's next. I'm Sabina. I grew up in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. Small towns, old brick buildings, American flags on porches, everyone pretending they liked each other more than they did. My father, Hugh, was a well-known orthopedic surgeon at Evangelical Community Hospital. Tall, stiff, always in some shade of gray. My mother, Serena, taught violin at the local music conservatory, thin, poised, never without a glass of Sauvignon Blanc after 5 p.m. On paper, we looked like the perfect family. We went to church every other Sunday, attended community events, and donated to local charities. But inside that house, behind the white-painted columns and vintage shutters, was a vacuum. Not of sound, but of love. I was their only child. A quiet one. Obsessed with astronomy, coding, and baking complicated French pastries on the weekends. I wasn't rebellious. I wasn't even loud. And yet I was never enough. When I was 16, things started changing in my body. Subtly at first. I'd get tired more easily. My joints ached. I started losing weight, though my appetite stayed the same. Then came the stomach problems. The fainting spells. The nausea. The chest pain. At first, I thought it was just school stress. I was taking AP courses and had just started preparing for the SATs. I told my mother I felt dizzy almost every morning. She told me to eat less sugar. I told my father my knees were locking and clicking. He told me I should exercise more. And when I collapsed in the hallway at school one afternoon, when everything in my vision turned white and I dropped like a marionette with its strings cut, they said I was acting. I still remember the look on Serena's face in the ER. Cold. Embarrassed. She asked the doctor, right in front of me, could it be psychological? And when he ordered some preliminary blood work and fluids, she sighed and muttered, she just needs attention all the time. It took another year before I got a diagnosis. After being dismissed by our family doctor. After being called dramatic by my own parents. After I stopped telling them anything at all. It was only when I passed out in the shower and had to be taken to Geisinger Medical Center by ambulance that a specialist finally ordered connective tissue testing. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Classic type. Chronic fatigue. Gastrointestinal issues. Joint instability. Autonomic dysfunction. You name it, I had it. But even after I had a name for my pain, my parents didn't change. They nodded along at the appointment like they were supportive, but once we were back in the car, Hugh said, so this isn't fatal, right? I said no. He said, good. Then I guess you'll go back to school now. I dropped out 2 months later. I couldn't sit for long periods. Couldn't eat without nausea. My joints would dislocate if I turned in bed too fast. I had to use compression gear and mobility aids just to get to the bathroom. I became a shadow in my own home. They didn't look at me anymore. They stopped knocking on my door. Serena would leave a plate of food outside if she remembered. Usually she didn't. It became clear to me that I had one role in that house, to not inconvenience them. I spent my days in bed. Not by choice, but because my body gave me none. And yet, I taught myself how to code. I had nothing but time and pain and silence. So I learned how to create. I designed small tools, apps, widgets, anything to help myself and others like me. The kind of software that made browsers more accessible for people with vision problems or chronic fatigue. The kind of things that felt small but made a difference. I shared them in disability subreddits, and people started using them. Then they started asking for more. So I made more. Then someone from a startup in Chicago reached out and asked if I'd consider partnering. I said yes. I was 20 when I moved out. A woman named Noelle, who I'd met in an online support group, had an extra room in her townhouse in Philly. She invited me to stay, and I took the first train out of Lewisburg without so much as a goodbye. When I told my parents I was moving, Serena said, "You'll be back. No one's going to take care of you like we did." It took everything in me not to laugh. In Philadelphia, I found more than just freedom. I found people. A community. I got proper medical care. A gastroenterologist who didn't roll his eyes when I mentioned pain. A physical therapist who actually touched my joints instead of telling me to just rest. A life. My startup grew. Slowly at first, then all at once. We launched a toolset called PathBright for patients with mobility issues. One of the biggest hospital systems in the Midwest licensed it. Then came funding. Then a buyout offer. I sold my stake for a little under $2.8 million. I bought a house in Chestnut Hill with wide doorways, a custom-built bathtub, and the softest mattress you could imagine. I got a cat. A tabby named Jupiter. I still had EDS. Still had bad days. But I had agency now. I had peace. And that's when the doorbell rang. It was a Wednesday afternoon. I was working on a grant proposal for a nonprofit I'd recently joined. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, I saw Hugh and Serena. It took me a second to recognize them. Serena had aged harshly. Her once golden hair was brittle and gray at the roots. Hugh looked smaller somehow. Diminished. They stood side by side like strangers who happened to arrive at the same door. They said they were just in town and thought they'd stop by. They looked at my house like they couldn't believe it belonged to me. I invited them in because, I don't know, habit maybe. Because somewhere, deep inside me, that child still wanted something from them. Closure. Acknowledgement. Something. They didn't stay long. 20 minutes, maybe. But long enough to ask. Serena was the one who finally said it. Our retirement plans fell through. The house, the upkeep is too much. We're drowning. I nodded slowly. We could really use some help, Hugh added. Alone. Just to get through. I remember looking down at my tea, the steam curling like a question. And then I looked at them. My parents. The people who told me my pain was drama. Who called me a burden. Who let me starve in my own room. I said one word. No. Serena blinked like she hadn't heard me right. No, she echoed. No, I said again. I begged for your love for 2 years. I almost died in that house. And now you want money? You're being vindictive, Hugh said, voice tight. No, I replied calmly. I'm free. And with that, I stood up and walked to the door. They left. Silently. No anger. No tears. Just shock. And now? Now I'm planning something they'd never see coming. Not cruel. Just honest. A memoir. Not for revenge. For others. For the thousands of people who are told their pain is drama. For those who suffer silently behind closed doors with parents who wear masks in public and wild cruelty in private. They wanted to bury my story. Instead, I'm going to publish it. And that's just the beginning. They didn't contact me for a while after that. A few months went by. I think they were waiting for me to cool off, to come around, to feel guilty. They didn't realize I'd spent years waiting for them to come around, and nothing ever happened. What was different now? Just that I had money. Suddenly, their daughter was real again. What they hadn't counted on was that I had changed. That I wasn't the girl crying in her bed in Lewisburg, waiting for her mother to knock. I wasn't begging anymore. I wasn't asking. I had built something, brick by brick, from rock bottom, and they couldn't stomach the fact that they weren't a part of it. Around Thanksgiving, I got a letter. A real letter, in an envelope, with my old last name in Serena's neat, careful script. It was full of flowery nothingness. Pages of passive-aggressive nostalgia, attempts at rewriting history. She mentioned things like, remember when we used to bake pies together and your father always said you were the smartest person he knew. Not once did she say she was sorry. But she did say this, we still believe family should be there for each other, especially in times of need. Translation? We're still broke, and we still think you owe us. I didn't respond. I tucked the letter into the back of my desk drawer, behind tax receipts and old medical bills. A fitting place for it, unwanted reminders of things that had once hurt me but no longer had power. Still, the silence made me restless. There's a kind of emotional noise that fills your head when you've been abused, dismissed, and gaslit for so long. Even after you're out, even after you've healed, that static doesn't disappear overnight. It buzzes. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and wonder if maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe I should have helped them. Maybe I was turning into the cold person I swore I'd never become. Then I'd remember the night I lay on my bedroom floor for 6 hours because I was too dizzy to stand and too scared to call 911. Serena was downstairs watching a show on her tablet. Hugh was asleep. They never even checked on me. I'd remember the day I asked if we could get a ramp installed because the stairs were killing my knees, and Hugh laughed and said, "What's next, a wheelchair? You're not that sick." I'd remember sitting in a freezing hospital room after my third ER visit in 2 months and hearing Serena tell the nurse, "She exaggerates a lot. I think it's all stress." So no. I wasn't being cruel. I was finally telling the truth. Still, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life angry. Anger is a fire, and it burns the one holding the match. So I started working on something I could build instead of burn. The memoir idea had been floating in my mind for a while. But now, I am ready. Not to expose them, but to illuminate all the Sabinas out there still curled up in quiet bedrooms, wondering if anyone sees them. I started writing during the winter. Every morning, I'd sit in my sunroom, Jupiter curled in my lap, and I'd write down memories as they came. Some were vivid. Some were foggy. Some were so painful I had to stop and just breathe. I didn't sugarcoat anything. But I didn't sensationalize either. I just told the truth. And the truth was this: my parents taught me how to survive, not through guidance, but through absence. Not through protection, but through neglect. And survival had turned into strength. A cold, steady kind of strength. The kind you don't celebrate, but carry quietly. In the meantime, things started to unravel for Hugh and Serena. I heard through an old high school friend that the house in Lewisburg was on the market. They weren't getting any offers. The town had changed, people wanted new, not historic. The upkeep on a 120-year-old colonial was steep, and no one wanted to pay $500,000 for old pipes and drafty windows. They'd already sold the vacation cabin in Elk County. Serena had given up teaching, arthritis, apparently. Hugh had taken early retirement, but with the malpractice lawsuit draining his pension, they were scraping by. The same friend said she overheard Serena at the grocery store talking about me. "She's doing fine now," she said. "Running some tech company. But she's always been a little dramatic. I'm sure she'll come around." That was the moment I realized they still didn't get it. It wasn't about money. It was about the years they pretended I didn't matter. About the way they stripped me of dignity and called it parenting. About the way they left me to rot inside my own body and called it tough love. And now, with all that crumbling around them, they were hoping I'd forget. That I'd fold back into the daughter role they designed, silent, obedient, generous. But I'd written too much. Felt too much. Fought through too much. One night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I usually let those go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Sabina?" It was Hugh. His voice was thin. Dry. I didn't speak. He cleared his throat. "I heard about the book." I said nothing. He continued. We wish you'd called first. Give us a heads up. You know how small towns are." "I didn't write it for the town," I said. Silence. "Your mother's very upset." I let the silence hang there. Then I said, "Goodbye, Hugh," and hung up. They wanted to control the narrative. But the story was mine now. And I wasn't done telling it. After I hung up on Hugh, I expected a storm. Some rage-filled voicemail. A guilt-ridden text. Maybe even another unexpected visit. But instead, I got something worse. Nothing. Silence. A vacuum. It was familiar, eerily so. Like slipping back into the same room where I spent my teenage years, hearing the muffled clicks of Serena's wine glass on the countertop while I lay in bed, invisible. But this time, I didn't feel helpless. I was just observant. Curious, even. It was like watching a dying star through a telescope. You can't hear it collapse, but you can feel the pull of it. The quiet destruction. And I could feel it now, whatever thread tethered us, it was unraveling on their end too. The book took on a life of its own. I'd planned to self-publish it quietly, maybe sell a few hundred copies. But my editor, yes, I ended up hiring a real editor, passed it along to someone at a small press in Philadelphia. And from there, things snowballed. A podcast reached out. Then another. A health blogger with 1 million followers reposted an excerpt. People in the chronic illness and disability communities shared their own versions of what I'd lived. My parents told me I was faking too. They said it was anxiety. They told me I'd grow out of it. They didn't believe me either. It wasn't just about me anymore. My story was a mirror for people who'd been gaslit, minimized, and silenced for decades. And finally, they saw themselves clearly in someone else's reflection. A woman from Vermont emailed me a 5-page letter about how my book helped her cut ties with her abusive father. A teacher in Austin used it as reading material for a seminar on empathy and invisible illness. I couldn't believe it. This tiny, aching life I thought no one would care about was suddenly helping people reclaim their voices. But you know who didn't mention it? Hugh and Serena. Not directly, anyway. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me on Facebook. Just saw your mom at a funeral. She's telling everyone your book is fiction. Said you were always good at storytelling. I laughed out loud. Loud enough to scare Jupiter off the windowsill. Fiction. Of course. Because admitting it was real would mean admitting they failed. That they weren't loving parents. That they let their daughter rot in silence while they sipped wine and played community royalty in Lewisburg. And if there's one thing Serena Burnham loved more than her pride, it was her image. Still, I knew it was only a matter of time before they'd reach out again. I was right. 2 weeks later, I got an email from Serena. It wasn't long. Just a few lines. Sabina, I don't know what you think you're trying to accomplish with all of this. You've embarrassed us. You've blown things out of proportion. But if you really want to talk, the door's still open. Mom, I stared at the screen for a long time. No apology. No remorse. Just blame. And a door that was never really open to begin with. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. I had a new plan, something that wasn't revenge, exactly, but something I knew would make them deeply uncomfortable. See, the money from the book wasn't life-changing. I didn't need it to be. But it did give me something Serena and Hugh never gave me, options. And one of those options was a nonprofit I quietly founded under a different name. Second Voice. It offered microgrants, mobility aids, and emotional support for young people diagnosed with chronic illnesses and disabilities. No red tape. No endless paperwork. Just help. I funded most of it myself. But I also did something small, and, yes, a little bit vindictive. I used a photo of my old house in Lewisburg, the white colonial with the ivy-covered trellis, as a background for the Why We Started section on the site. Subtle. Anonymous. No names. No callouts. Just the image of a place where a lot of silence once lived. It didn't take long before the locals started to recognize it. A woman I didn't know messaged me on Instagram. Is this the Burnham house? I used to take music lessons from your mom. That's wild. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. That image was doing the work now. Quietly. Like me. And somewhere out there, I imagined Serena logging onto the site. Seeing her perfectly curated world twisted into something she couldn't control. That was the thing about control, she'd only ever had it when I was weak. Quiet. Dependent. But now I had a voice. A platform. And more importantly, I had boundaries. Ironclad ones. Hugh tried once more. This time through my accountant. He somehow got the name of the firm handling my finances and emailed them directly. Said he wanted to open a conversation about estate planning. Asked if I'd be willing to discuss family reconciliation in exchange for joint investment opportunities. I remember reading the forwarded message and laughing so hard I cried. Investment opportunities? It wasn't even subtle anymore. They were grasping. Panicking. And I didn't have to do anything. Just live. Just exist, loudly and truthfully. The life they told me I'd never have, the one they said I wasn't strong enough to build, was thriving. I didn't need revenge. I was already winning. And they hadn't even seen the full picture yet. Winter came early that year. Philadelphia was blanketed in snow by mid-November. I was standing in my sunroom one morning, coffee in hand, Jupiter curled like a donut on the heated floor mat, when I got a call from my publisher. The audiobook rights had been sold to a major streaming platform. The narrator they'd picked had a calm, compassionate voice that made even the most painful chapters feel like someone was holding your hand through them. The royalties would be generous. And so would the exposure. But that wasn't what excited me most. What thrilled me, truly, deeply, was the news that the memoir was being considered for adaptation. A production company in New York had picked up the rights. They were interested in a limited series. Something real, grounded, character-driven. No exaggeration. No glossy endings. Just the truth. I insisted on that. If my name was going to be on it, I wanted authenticity. No sob story angles. No martyr tropes. They agreed. And then the casting started. When the initial script drafts came in, I cried. Not because of the pain, but because of the power. Watching my story unfold in script form, seeing my experiences honored and not dismissed, it did something to me. It was the validation I never got in that cold house on Harrison Street. I gave the producers a list of names to avoid using for the characters. Names that were theirs. They were fictionalized versions, of course, but anyone in Lewisburg would know exactly who they were based on. And that was the point. See, revenge doesn't always come in fire and fury. Sometimes, it's calculated truth with a spotlight and a wide audience. And this was going to be very, very public. It didn't take long for word to travel back to Lewisburg. A former classmate messaged me, "Your mom was at the town library the other day losing it. She said the show is a smear campaign. Told the librarian it's all lies and the family was being defamed." Then came the email. "Sabina, we are begging you. Please don't do this. Your father's health is fragile. My name in this town means everything. I'm not the villain you're making me out to be. We had our flaws, but we did our best. Please reconsider. Think of your legacy. Don't let bitterness define you." Mom, I read it twice. Then I opened my reply window and typed, "Serena, you didn't do your best. You did what was convenient. You looked away. You called it love because it was easier than calling it what it was. Neglect. I'm not bitter. I'm free. And freedom looks different than you thought it would. I'm not telling this story to shame you. I'm telling it to save others. If you don't want people to recognize themselves in these characters, maybe you should have treated me like a human being instead of a burden." The cameras roll in January. Sabina, I hit send. And for the first time in my life, I felt clean. When the show premiered, it was streamed by millions. The reviews called it gutting and gorgeous, an honest portrayal of familial betrayal and the triumph of self-worth. The actors playing me did a phenomenal job, quiet, sharp, resilient. People cried. People raged. People saw themselves. And yes, people in Lewisburg recognized the house. The story. The cold dinners. The icy silences. The mother's offhand cruelty disguised as sophistication. The father's indifference veiled in career devotion. My old neighbors connected the dots. And suddenly, Hugh and Serena couldn't walk into the local co-op or post office without being met with long stares. They weren't harassed. Nothing cruel. But their masks had cracked, and the people around them could finally see the faces underneath. They moved 6 months later. Quietly. No goodbyes. I heard they sold the house far under market value and left town. Rumor is they're in upstate New York now. A modest rental. No more garden clubs. No more prestige. But me? I kept going. I launched a scholarship in my name, the Sabina Fund, for chronically ill young women who want to work in tech or accessibility. Full tuition, mentorship, even housing stipends. The first recipient? A 17-year-old from Ohio named Amira, diagnosed with EDS and dismissed by her high school for faking it. She called me crying after reading my book. "You made me feel like I wasn't alone," she said. And that right there, was the closure. Not the show. Not the sales. Not the beautifully crafted, subtle revenge that played out like a quiet symphony in front of millions. But that call. That girl. That moment of knowing I had taken the ugliest parts of my life and built a door where there once was only a wall. My parents didn't love me. But I learned to love myself. And I helped others do the same. That was my real revenge. And the most satisfying part? They had to watch me rise. Every step of the way.